Hey everyone, a couple of really great opportunities through Alberta beef producers. First, our Young Creators Contest. This is a new contest. It's an opportunity for those aged 23 and under to showcase their creativity, passion, and knowledge of the beef industry. Some really great prizes, swag, cash, and for those 19 to 23, the opportunity of a lifetime to join us along with political representatives and beef producers at the upcoming Alberta Beef Industry Stampede Summit. And next we have our Environmental Stewardship Award. Nominations are open now. Please help us celebrate somebody you know who's a beef producer, who's passionate about the environment. And let's get that story out there to a broader audience as well. This is a really great opportunity. Head to abpdaily.com. You can just type in the search bar either Young Creators or Environmental Stewardship Award. That's abpdaily.com.
If these temperature swings aren't managed, we can see huge intakes in fluctuations in their intake. So that's both feed and water. At a macro level and a micro level, there's a lot of things going on.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Whenever you are listening to this, I hope it's good. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Bovine. I'm your host, Kara Mastel. As we all know, the first few months of the year tend to bring extreme temperature changes. Where I'm at in southern Alberta, it especially seems to quickly go from minus 30 to 5 above in what really feels like the blink of an eye. And do not get me started on the wind that accompanies these temperature with these changes. It is just sometimes a lot, and I wish the wind would stop. But anyways, that is besides the point. These extreme swings don't just pose challenges for us humans managing our day-to-day lives. They also create significant challenges for our bovine friends. In this episode, my guests and I will explore practice strategies to help you manage these temperature extremes, ensuring the health and well-being of your cattle and maintaining the efficiency of your operations. Today's guest is Dr. Brittany Smith, a consulting ruminant nutritionist. Wow, say that 10 times fast. Ruminant nutritionist with Beef Smart Consulting, Inc. Brittany grew up on a mixed farm near Bentley, Alberta, and developed a passion for ruminant nutrition and research during her undergraduate years. She went on to complete her DVM and Master of Science at the University of Saskatchewan. After working as a large animal veterinarian in southwest Saskatchewan for 6 years, she joined the Beef Smart team where she continues to innovate and help producers achieve their goals while living and ranching near Abbey, Saskatchewan. Thanks for joining me on The Bovine, Brittany.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
So, yeah, big temperature swings. We got lots of things going on. To start, how do extreme temperature swings affect cattle health and well-being?
Well, I guess the big caveat here would probably be like management. So I'll put an asterisk here that if these temperature swings aren't managed, we can see huge intakes in fluctuations in their intake. So that's both feed and water. And then there's kind of physiological changes as well that we're going to see, such as, increased metabolic rate. So they're trying to generate more heat, burn more energy to generate more heat to stay warm. We're seeing kind of vasoconstriction of those extremities. So blood supply to the ears, the tails, the feet being changed. Definitely kind of behavioral changes and other things that can affect stress and cortisol levels. So kind of at a macro level and a micro level, there's a lot of things going on that can predispose them to disease and poor performance.
So when you say behavior, does that impact activity levels as well?
So yeah, definitely. I mean, anything from like you think of cows out in the field. Right now I'm looking out my office window and our cows are bunched up, right, hiding behind the windbreak. They're kind of grouped together. They're not doing much today. They're not really going to do much to venture out. Bunk conditions, even in the feedlots or in pens, it's going to change their behavior at the bunk, whether they can access the bunk if there's mud or ice, and a lot of things. And behavior is really maybe an underappreciated or has an underappreciated impact on their feed intake and their performance. They're kind of creatures of habit and, the herd animals. So they really that herd dynamic, and anything that changes it can really cause them stress.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes just a cow acting off can mean there's something off inside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when we're talking about, acting off or whatever, it impacts to the immune system here as well. These temperature swings, like I'm not just talking when it just gets cold, but it's one thing for it to be cold and stay cold, but this back and forth it's a lot on probably the immune system.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And I think so the problem, and like you nailed it, was the fluctuation. So they don't really have the ability to acclimate when we're seeing these temperature swings. And you hear a lot of people will talk about, sickness in calves and how we're seeing so much more pneumonia when we get cold at night and warmer temperatures during the day. And actually there is science behind that. There's been studies where they looked at the actual number of colonizing bacteria, specifically Mannheimia bugs in the upper respiratory tract of these calves. And they can see that cold weather causes an increased number of these colonizers, and actually temperature swings. So even from cold temperatures moving towards warmer temperatures will increase the number. So we have more bugs that are just there, increasing our risk of disease. And then the little cilia, the little hairs that are used to clear mucus and pathogens from the respiratory tract, those slow down in cold weather as well. And so they've got more bugs, they've got a decreased clearance mechanism. So it does kind of set them up and predispose them to more disease. And then as well, we talk about, the cortisol, the stress hormones that impair the immune system. So it does kind of set them up for a perfect storm. Cattle crave consistency. And so anything that is knocking their intakes back or causing variable intakes can affect their immune system as well. And that it, predispose them to subacute ruminal acidosis, kind of all plays a part in their total health.
I'm starting to think I might have more in common with cattle than I realize. I like consistency, and when I get off my routine, I get sick. So me and the cows got to figure it out. Can anything be done here? If you're seeing one of these patterns, you're looking at your 2-week forecast, and you're seeing these patterns come up. From a risk management perspective, is there anything that can be done? Vaccinations, things like that?
Well, I think keeping aware, like you said, our we've got these forecast tools, we've got these apps. So being aware and preparing for these things is a lot of it. And we're lucky in cold stress as opposed to heat stress. Here in Canada, we have maybe a lot more tools in our toolbox to help cattle get through things, environmental things like providing them windbreaks and shelters, bedding, to improve insulation. Bedding will keep them dried. Bedding will prevent them from forming tag, which can reduce kind of the insulation factors of their coat. So those are kind of environmental things that we can help change. On a nutritional or dietary level, yeah, so providing them increased feed. So anytime they get below their kind of lower critical temperature, which in cattle is surprisingly high. So a kind of a mature cow with a dry, good winter coat, anything below -8 degrees Celsius, she actually has to expend energy and expend energy to stay warm. And so her intake is going to increase in order to kind of make that up and make that heat increment of feeding. So providing them more feed, being ready to do that, or providing them more energy dense feed as well is something we recommend.
Now, when looking at, increased amount of feed, now, if it suddenly fluctuates back warmer again, do you have issues with waste at that point? Is there a way to mitigate that waste? All of a sudden you got a bunk full of feed and, the cows aren't so interested in it anymore.
So, I mean, ideally, if and in a feedlot situation, I guess let's talk there. You would increase their intakes even maybe before you're expecting the storm or the cold weather drop, and then you might drop them back, feed them less. So change your bunk calls before the weather event is over, and so that would kind of prevent them from having that rebound when they kind of intakes, they come back to the bunk after the storm. Kind of prevents that buildup of waste feed in the bunk.
saves you from shoveling some bunks out.
Yeah, and shoveling bunks, nobody likes to do it, especially on a day like today, but it's a really important management tool. So
Absolutely. So we've talked a bit of short term here. Are there any long term effects of repeated exposure to extreme fluctuations?
yeah, so again, if no accommodations are made, so if we're not, accounting for this and providing, shelter and more feed and helping them through it, definitely, both economically and welfare wise, we're going to see effects. And probably one of the biggest ones is loss of body condition score. So if that cow isn't able to maintain, if she's having to expend energy and use up her body stores to stay warm, she's gonna lose body condition. And we've all seen those cows that just seem to like melt, right? You have a week of cold temperatures and they just melt. That loss of body condition score now is really expensive because it's really hard to put back on. As we get into later gestation, they're limited in how much feed they can actually take in because that calf is growing in size and taking up room in the abdomen. And then putting weight on in cold weather is really, really tricky. So that's an issue. Cows that come into calving in a thinner body condition score, it's going to take them longer to return to estrus. So that postpartum interval is actually extended for thin cows, and their pregnancy rate subsequently is going to be affected. So, you have those implications as well. Frostbite, another one. Economically, we know that you're not getting paid for calves that are missing ears or tails. On the purebred side, frostbite and on testicles for purebred bulls can be an issue, and these kind of fluctuations and stress of these events can cause reductions in semen quality that we see. And then, of course, like lost feed conversions, your feed to gain will go up, meaning they need to consume more to put on those pounds during these cold conditions.
Mm-hmm. Now, what role does forage quality play here?
So we're using kind of forage, like when you think of a ruminant, the ruminant is essentially a big fermentation vat, right? And there's a lot of heat of fermentation that's produced, and it can be detrimental to us in warm weather, but it can help us in colder weather. And so high quality forage is going to not only kind of help with that heat of fermentation, but it's going to contribute to the total energy needs of that cow. And we know, or maybe I mentioned that, we know our energy requirements are increased during these cold temperatures. And so a high quality forage is going to help contribute to that. I think the bigger issue and the more important one to focus on is poor quality forage. So, if this year's been not maybe as bad, but the last few years, we've seen a lot of fairly poor quality forage being put up, more yellow feed than green feed. And if we're flocking that fine line and pushing NDF levels in these cows, meaning the kind of the fiber, the fill level, we're going to see issues with impaction. If all of a sudden their water intake drops off, you've got a frozen water bowl, or you can't get to the dugout to chop ice. Anytime, that water intake is dropped, then that's risking these cows on poor quality forage for impaction. I've seen in storm situations where they start eating the bedding, right? They're not going to leave the bedding pack to come to the bunk. So we've got poor quality forage already in there, and then dumping a bunch of bedding on top of that. And it can lead to issues like impaction. So I think.
Yeah. So when you're monitoring these body condition scores too, like what are you looking for?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So body condition score, I think it's tough for producers because we ourselves, you get a little bit herd blind when you're just visually scoring them. You're out there every day. Either you don't see the thin ones, or maybe you're the opposite and all you see is the thin cows. But it's really important to get hands onto them. And so I was just talking to a producer the other day who thought his cows were maybe not doing as well. And then they ran them through to scour vaccinate them, and like, oh, actually, no, I got hands on them and they're just fine. And so feeling, the rib cover over the short ribs, they should have nice cover there. I look a lot at the tail head, whether there's some fill in there, and it should be a little bit spongy. One thing that is actually kind of a cool trick is if you're just out feeding is does the snow blanket melt? And so a cow that has a good body condition score and good insulation of fat, that snow will actually sit on her back and won't melt. If the snow is melting off the cow in cold temperatures, that means that she's like losing energy. So she's got no insulation. And so
Interesting. Yeah, I know it's lots of times you think it quite the opposite probably. You look and you go, "Oh gosh, that animal must be cold. Look at all the snow he's got on him." But
yeah,
exactly, that means he's actually insulating.
it's a good sign. I guess the other thing about body condition scoring and why it's so important is it allows us to make management changes. And so doing it well in advance of, these cold temperatures or these storms that we're expecting allows us to sort off those cows that maybe need a bit more help, whether they're old or young, manage them in different groups. And so whether that means they need a different ration or they just need less competition, it really helps those animals out. And conversely, it maybe allows you to push your cows in good condition a little bit harder or a little bit differently. Maybe they can work more for a living during these cold temperatures than those animals that are a little bit compromised can. So it's a huge management change, and it's definitely well worth getting hands-on in body condition scoring.
And now I'd assume in a feedlot situation like you're talking, growth rates would slow down in these swings?
Yes, yeah. So we do see a reduction in growth rates, and there's some literature out there showing that even up to 70% reduction in growth rate during the colder months. So keep in mind their intakes are increasing, but their growth rate is they're just not able to convert that intake quite as well, or that feed quite as well. Kind of a rule of thumb would be that if your calves in your feedlot, if you're finding that they're eating more than 2.5% of their body weight on a dry matter basis, which is kind of traditionally what we would say is an animal's level of intake, then we would recommend bumping up the energy density of the diet, and that can kind of account a little bit and maybe compensate for some of those reduced growth rate and those numbers, just by providing them a little bit more of an energy dense diet. They don't need to take as much in, I guess, if that makes sense, to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I know some producers, I'm not jealous of them, but some producers are calving right now. Temperature swings, how do they affect milk production? Anything there?
Oh my goodness. Well, so like when we think about the energy tree, right? And when we get all the way down, when we've lost, feces and we've lost urine and we've lost gas, what we're left with, we've lost heat, we're left with net energy. And so lactation requires a lot of energy, and anything that's going to be peeling energy off above that tree is going to affect what we have left over as net energy for lactation. And so certainly that could be an impact. Water access. So milk production is hugely driven by water intake. And so anything that, right now, if they don't have access to that water bowl, if it's frozen or if the sides are too icy and slippery and they're not taking in enough water, then that will drop off lactation. And we know that lactation is like the number one driver of pre-weaning calf weights and subsequent weaning weights. And so we really don't want to compromise lactation in these cows.
So it's not just a matter of feed, it's making sure that they have access to that good quality water.
Water is so important, and it's so underrated, quality and quantity, and accessibility. So, if it's there, are they accessing it? Are there enough water bowls available? So, is there behavior dynamics that are affecting their accessibility? Those are all things that kind of, we as nutritionists and consultants, those are often things that we're diving into on farm is water availability and quality.
And now if you're looking at the calf itself, what are those first signs of cold stress? What really should you be looking for that you go, okay, there's an issue here?
Poor little guys born on days like today.
Oh, I know.
So obviously, like, I would say that anything that has been maybe, had dystocia or that you've had to help out, they're automatically at an increased risk just because of their oxygenation and their decreased time to stand up and supple, right, and get that colostrum into them. So So those are the calves that, we're going to see issues with. Cold mouth, so you stick your finger in their mouth and everybody's done it. They don't want to suckle and their mouth is freezing cold. That's a good sign. If their gums are pale, is another thing we would look at. And then if you're getting as advanced as taking a rectal temperature, they'll have a low rectal temperature, so below 37.5 or 37.7.
So I know with like some small ruminants, they always say don't feed them if they're cold, like don't bottle feed them. Is that the same situation with calves?
So calves need to get colostrum into them as quickly as possible. And there's some factors actually in colostrum itself that turn on thermogenesis of these little brown fat cells. And these cells are little metabolic powerhouses. And they generate a lot of heat once they've kind of been activated. And so colostrum is definitely one of the mainstays of warming these calves back up. Another thing, I guess, is these calf huts, or water. So I know people will, have seen videos where they're jumping in the hot tub with the calves or putting them in the bathtub. And so really the fastest way to warm them up possible. When I was in practice, we would use like garbage bags and, throw a heater under a garbage bag just to trap the heat. To warm those calves up. I've heard of people using sleeping bags to chuck a calf in and zip them up. It's kind of about trying to get their temperature back up as quickly as we can. And again, that colostrum, I mean, if they don't receive it and if they're delayed too far in getting it, that's going to set them up for a lifetime of disadvantages. So
because it has to be within that first 24 hours, correct?
So yeah, so I'm going to date myself, but when I went through vet school, it was, it was within 24 hours. And I think now it's maybe down to 6 hours that they want them to get the majority of it in. And so I'm not sure if, in 10 more years, if it'll be, in the first 2 hours of life, but certainly quickly. And then they have to have the right quantity as well. So, we consider the 3 Qs of colostrum, which are, quality, quantity, and quickly.
So when we're looking, like you talk about shelters, windbreaks, things like that, do you want to talk about what a difference they actually make? It seems small, but what a windbreak could do to protect from harsh weather?
Well, yeah, my goodness. So, I mean, cows aren't not like your tractor, right? They're affected by wind chill the same as we are. And if you don't have, I guess, the right amount of windbreaks. So when we talk about, herd dynamic and behavior, you consider, where the weakest animal is going to end up if not everybody has space to stand behind that windbreak, which should be protecting them from the prevailing wind, right? They recommend about 1 foot per cow in the group is what they should have access to. And if you think about if they don't have that, who is going to be on the outskirts of that pack of animals, right? It is going to be your compromised, weaker animals. And so we want to avoid that and give them all as much access as we can. I think wind is the thing that really seems to kick them down. So cold temperatures are hard on them, but wind just, I mean, I feel the same way. It just knocks the stuffing out of you. So
I know. I always say, like, some people say, 10 degrees is the best day. But I mean, again, being in southern Alberta, like 10 degrees often means it's going to be windy in the winter anyways. I'm like, I would take like -5, -10 any day if it meant no wind.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. Unfortunately, there's not many days that aren't windy where I live. So
no, exactly. So I guess, you mentioned you talked about the one producer specifically who looked at his herd and thought they were in worse shape than they actually were. Do you have any effective ways to monitor the herd health during these temperature fluctuations?
So yeah, I mean, I guess I talked a little bit about the snow cover on their back, so that's a good kind of objective way to assess body condition score from a distance. Body condition score is probably the biggest way to monitor their herd health during this time. Intakes are going to be kind of your first indication. So if you go out to feed and you notice they've got a lot left over from the day before, check your water because, like I've said, water intake drives feed intake, and so just their actual consumption is a good thing to keep an eye on. And then I guess like remote cameras. So out here we have we have a few producers that are using some of that remote capability to monitor water well sites, and I think that's a really cool way to use technology, especially if it's a big job to start the diesel and drive out to check the water every day. Kind of having the ability to just glance at your phone and check and make sure it's running and cows are getting some to drink is pretty important.
Any other technology that you're hearing producers are using, maybe for data analytics or, to predict and manage your temperature impacts?
So maybe not so much in like temperature, but dealing with all the issues that come with the fluctuating temperatures. I would say the best and most value anyone could have is the scale. If we say that you can't manage what you can't measure, and it's so true. Knowing the weights that you're looking for on these calves and knowing the weights of the calves allows you to kind of make these changes. So if we have lost ground during the last storm or during poor weather, if we have that knowledge, we can make adjustments and get these calves back on track. So I think a scale is a huge thing. Feed testing is another technology that I think more and more producers are on board with now. Whether they take those feed test results and do anything with them is another question. But knowing the different qualities, and even if you're as simple as ranking your feeds and maybe saving your better quality feed for later in winter. Contingency planning. I always have people keep a high quality feed on hand in case the mixed wagon doesn't run, and you don't want to be stuck relying on a TMR and not be able to feed your cattle anything. And so we always want to have some high quality feed available that in a worst case scenario, and you can only get the tractor out, you can put some bales out.
Absolutely. Any success stories or best practices? I mean, you talk to a lot of different people, and anything you've seen that you've been like, that's a really great way to do that?
Yeah. So luckily, I mean, in our business and the clients I work with, they're amazing. We've got a lot of innovative producers. And so I get to pick their brains almost daily. I think when we talk about calf health and warming calves up, a cool one would be actually taking the warming hut or taking a trailer with a heater in it out to the calves. So that's reduced incidences of mismothering on a lot of ranches. A lot of people who are able to devise something to take the warming device to the calf rather than having to pull the calf on or off of mom and bring him into the barn. There's of course disease risk anytime you're consolidating calves in a barn, but then that mismothering stress is gone. That takes that off your plate. We talked about kind of the contingency planning, so I think that's a really good strategy or best practice. Adjusting intakes prior to the storm is another, something that you can do that you have control over. And then I was just talking just the other day and keeping your feeding sites, I guess being cognizant of your feeding sites. And so whether that's, starting feeding farther out and moving your way closer to the yard as you get closer to calving in bad weather, or maybe leaving areas accessible close to shelter. So when you're expecting those storms or when the weather does turn, you're able to provide feed to your cows, closer to the bush or the trees or the shelter. Those, I guess, are just kind of off the top of my head. I talked to my husband and we really try to keep our wind fences and our shelters as close as we possibly can to our water bowls. And so that, it concentrates the calves. Our calves are out in the field, concentrates them close to water so they don't have to travel very far. And it helps keep those geothermals open as well. The more animals that are drinking there, frequently it helps them from icing over. So
very interesting what producers continue to come up with to, manage all the stresses that Mother Nature can throw at us sometimes.
Like they're pretty resilient folks, ranchers, aren't they?
Absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to add here? Any messaging you maybe like to send to a producer that might be listening?
Oh goodness. Well, I think I've touched on the main points. Would be, like as practices just in general, feed testing is so important. working with a nutritionist, this might all seem overwhelming and how to manage all this. Working with a nutritionist to come up with these diet plans for colder weather, for late gestation, definitely something we do very commonly and can help out with. I guess the economics of it. So it seems, maybe like a lot of extra work when it comes down to, you're trying to bed, you're trying to feed, you're trying to keep equipment running in these colder temperatures. But, if you consider the cost of putting on body condition at this time of year is very expensive. The cost of losing a calf this time of year, I'm not sure exactly what the cost of an orphan calf would be right now. I'm imagining it's probably, $800 to $1,000. And goodness knows, I think that maybe the only thing less predictable than the weather is what calf prices are going to do next fall. But
Yeah.
I think that the work, especially in this area, it will always pay off economically, and I think that's important to impress upon people.
Absolutely. That's a great note to leave it on. But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate all this information today. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, and I'm glad to share a little bit, and hope everybody stays warm and manages okay till we get out the other side.
And with that, our episode is coming to a close. Thanks for diving into the complexities of managing extreme temperature fluctuations and their impact on cattle health and well-being. We covered a lot of ground, from understanding the physiological changes in cattle to practical nutrition and feeding strategies for cold weather and essential management practices to mitigate the effects of this extreme weather, especially when it really is going from +5 to -30 to +5 to -30. You guys know the drill. It's a lot. Special thanks to our guest, Dr. Brittany Smith, for sharing her expertise and insights. Just remember, staying proactive and informed can make a significant difference in maintaining the health and productivity of your herd during these challenging times. And also remember, just because from afar your herd looks like it is in not so great a shape or in really great shape, that doesn't mean you are seeing the whole story. So get in there and look at the cattle and see what's going on. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to bring you valuable tips, strategies, and expert advice to help you thrive in the world of cattle. Stay tuned to ABP Daily and your favorite apps for more. And hey, maybe you even have an idea for a future show, or you just have that burning question you'd like us to answer. Like I said, I'm still happy to be your guys' scapegoat. You have a question you don't want to ask yourself? I'm happy to do it for you. Get in touch on social by tagging Alberta Beef Producers and using the hashtag ABPsTheBovine. Or you can personally catch me on my email, karam@albertabeef.org. Until next time, stay safe and stay warm, everyone. Bye for now.